some of these questions, of course, shouldn't schools be doing just that, creating community? Isn't that sort of part of the pillars of what education should do for young people, but also for teachers and staff in general? What separates our school a lot from others is the pedagogical platform. And we emphasize the experimentation. As someone said here earlier, Kaospilot is not so concerned with subjects per se. We have had a competence model running at the school since 1995. So we pioneered the idea of a competence-oriented type of education in that model. We basically stole the model from Norway, but then no one remembers that today, because they had done it before us, from the military in Norway. But the main point, I will show you an image of it a bit later, was that the idea that knowledge does not exist in isolation. It exists in relationships, it exists in context, it exists somewhere between motivation and fear. And so all of that needs to come into play when we think about how do we educate someone for something. The experimentational part at Kaospilot is very important because it suggests the novelty. It suggests the not knowing part. And we have been working with that a lot. So basically every exam at the school is an examination where the students are the experts, not the professors. Because how on earth could a professor be an expert into a lived reality of a student? It is simply not possible. You may know certain things and say, this is a horrible, horrible idea for a business plan, or I've been working in the coffee making industry for 20 years, this will not fly. You could know that as an expert. You can't know what experiences you had when you try to make it. When you make a cultural festival, I may know a lot about marketing, logistics, all of those things, but I do not know your lived experience. So we try to approach this from a point of how can we understand a 360-degree orientation on learning, not only what you did not learn, which effectively is what we measure at school. We measure what you didn't learn, not what you learned, because you learned more than whatever we are going to measure. The explorative aspect is something at the school which stems from deep, I would say, from the people that apply for this school, because they're looking for something different. No one comes to the Kaospilot and say, I just come because I want something that everyone else had gone for. And what unites every student that have come into the doors at the Kaospilots, even if they have particular motivations that are different. Some people want to start a company, some people want to do a cultural career, some people want to go into politics. We have all. Some people want to remain professionally unemployed for the rest of their life. You have all of it, right? But the point is that they're looking for something, and what unites them is that longing for a change. They join because they want something to be different. And what we try to provide for them is a place and a space where they can try to explore what is that change all about? Where would you like to be going? So we always suggest that they try to make new paths, create new roads, and don't just follow what everyone else has done in the past. Do something new. The enterprising aspect speaks to the value creation of the school. We really want our students not just to obtain knowledge, but turn it into something, create something. It doesn't need to be a company, it can be anything, but try to create something that is providing value for you, for your customers, for your clients, for your partners, for society at large. And the experiential part is, of course, again, that we believe so much in this learning by doing, learning by experiencing, that there is something uniquely important in experiential learning, I think, which goes way beyond problem-based learning or project-based learning. It's because what is it that we are paying for? Think of it when you go on holidays. There was a time when I grew up when the most exotic one could think of was these parties in Spain that people in the 70s would go for. drink their head out for 1 week and do all of those Spanish things. It was also exotic just to take the ferry to Denmark. I don't think that anyone today will say yes. My biggest adventure for a weekend would be the ferry from Sweden to Denmark. But when I grew up, that was a whole lot of things, right? That's what you were doing. Today, we are paying for the experiencing aspect. I was once on a panel, I can't remember the president's name, but he was president of maybe the most important or most recognized entrepreneurship college in the world. His name, Schlesinger perhaps. At Babson College outside Boston. They were the ones that really promoted the idea of entrepreneurship from the 70s and onwards. And we were sitting in a panel and he received a fantastic question from someone in the audience where he said, what is the question that keeps you awake at night? And what is the most difficult things that you have to fight with as a president of this college? And he was silent and he said, my biggest question is to convince parents why they would pay $50,000 a year for their kids 7 hours of teaching per week in this university. 7 hours a week, $50,000 a year. Why on earth would anyone pay for that? Well, it's certainly not just for content. And that was his whole point. And he said that we need to think about this in a very different way. He has also sent a lot of teachers from his staff to us over the years, because I think we are not the answer, but we are one potential answer to the idea of what does a 24/7, 360-degree type of education look like. Because what students pay for at Kaospilot is essentially not content, it is the experience. That is also why we were so hit during COVID, because we could not provide it. A holistic approach becomes increasingly important, I think, with some of the struggles with well-being for young people in school today, which I'm not sure how it is here, but it's certainly top of the agenda in Denmark today, how to ensure that people don't fare bad at educations. The idea of preparing students for real life is, of course, I think our pedagogical platform is relatively good, because what it does is that it brings the real world into the walls of the school. And we bring the students to the outside. We bring the students out. We don't have textbook projects. We don't have that. We only have real projects. Everyone has a client, or else the students need to find clients for whatever they cook up. So you have that immediate connection with what does it mean to convey a message to someone else and try to bring them on board of whatever you want to accomplish. To a large extent, this is the journey that students undergo at the school, which means that you figure out what is it that you essentially are good at. And as you see, there is something that overlaps. There is also something about what you're passionate about, which is not necessarily the same thing. And it's certainly not the same as saying that you could be something that other people are willing to pay for, not just in money. It could be in attention, it could be in emotions, it could be other things. Finding that sweet spot is essentially the developmental journey that people go through at our education program. Figuring out, of all the things that I'm passionate about in the world, that I'm potentially really good at doing, what could actually carve out the business model around that. Business model should be understood very broadly. For some, that may be to continue to be a student for some, that they are really good, maybe to become an academic over time. But basically, this type of journey, I think, is essential for people in the sort of bring about whatever they learn at school into the life after school. We focus a lot of this, and this has become very popular. We adopted this from the first, when we started to have the school in the US. I presume Estonia is not so different from Sweden and Denmark in that way, that he doesn't necessarily approve failure a lot. Which it's so funny. I remember in the startup community in the 90s where when we adopted all of that terminology from the US and we said it's so important to fail. Yeah, it's really good for your resume. 3 bankruptcies, it would really make your career. I have not met that person that said, thanks to the 3 bankruptcies and all of the shareholders that I ruined, I suddenly got all of this. I've not met that person yet. But there is something about accepting that failure exists. And there is not such a thing that is not that we cannot learn from it and to become better at improving it. But it forces us to consider how to push the boundaries. The school, and this is something that some of the other thing that was pointed out here. For me, a lot. What boils down to what educations of the future need to provide for students, particularly as knowledge becomes more a commodity, careers maybe becomes more digitalized, perhaps, in many ways. I think every type of education needs to provide a sense of belonging. There needs to be a sense of belonging. For anyone that comes through the doors, they say, yeah, I belong here. I could be part of this. And I think that is why the application process to the Kaospilot has been so important. Because no one really has a clue what it's all about. So in the end, why they choose to join is because they look at other people and they say, this could be me. I want to be part of this. The other thing is, of course, you need to provide a sense of skill. We offer a very open platform. We don't create specifics like an accountant. You can learn a lot about accounting or how to disrupt the accounting industry by going to the school. But we are not precise enough to provide those educations. But there is something about how do you, as an education, provide a sense of skill together with sense of community. You need to also develop over time a sense of self. Who am I? What do I dream of? What are my values? And so forth. And last but not least, there needs to be a sense of direction. Where could I be going? The idea of saying that, yes, you will go to gymnasium and suddenly you know what your career is going to be all about, I think that is a diminishing return on that idea. Same as you, we also experience now that people change jobs far more frequently. There is nothing that suggests that that is going to change in the time to come. We at Kaospilot, approximately a third are considered entrepreneurs, or they consider themselves to be entrepreneurs, meaning that their main livelihood comes from something that they have started. If you look at over time, though, many of these people, they go from being an entrepreneur to be a student, to be an employee, to go back to be an entrepreneur. So it becomes a very fluid journey, which is very different from perhaps my own background, which is more static and more linear. And we see that fluidity permeates all parts of society. So the idea of sense of direction is not necessarily for me the clarity and idea of what will I retire like, but more what is next. What is next? Not necessarily what is the next, but finding a good next step. And in my experience when working with younger people, it provides a bit of soothing, because it's challenging for them when you ask them, so what do you want to be when you grow up? If I ask my kids, one day they want to go to the moon, right? And the other day I said, I am completely lost. I have zero idea what I want to do with my life. And then you can be grown up and you can say things like, well, if you have no idea where you're going, it doesn't really matter, does it? So then I suggest medical school for you. But that doesn't cut it, because knowing that they don't necessarily know what, in my experience, is very often because they have this idea, like we often think in the terms of relationships, the one, the person, like when you're young, the spouse that you're going to go for. But there are potentially many people that you can fall in love with in the same way with careers. I think most of us have sat around and thought, I could cut it as a policeman. I could be a firefighter. I could probably be this and that. It's not so there was only one thing, and that never changed for 30 years. I never thought the idea that I could become something different. I think again, those number of peoples are numbered. Okay, maybe, if you may, let me just drop all of this and we jump a bit to some of these things. What the hell did I have that one? Maybe take this one. Because we talked about the competency model. And when we started to work with this, so Kaospilot was a project management education in the beginning, meaning that we educated people that would run projects of a variety of kinds, primarily within the cultural sector. And we grew more out of the streets than from academia, which meant there was a bit of gung-ho orientation to cultural events in Scandinavia in the early 90s. A lot of goodwill, a lot of energy, but not necessarily so many great tools. What we experienced very quickly, though, was that what we maybe had thought of intuitively, that the idea of subject was not going to cut it. We needed more. We needed, for instance, we needed relationships, the social aspect. So there was even a slogan at the school at one point: it doesn't matter what you know, what matters is who you know. And maybe that was a bit naive in the extreme. You don't need to know anything, just as you know all the people, right? Maybe that was a bit naive. There is still some truth to the idea that the idea of the one unit that have all of the knowledge, I think again, that is a diminishing solution to the world's problem. So when we were discussing the idea of, okay, how can we talk about what then is it that we provide with people if it's not just knowledge, we started to look at competence. And we landed on the idea that it's not, we can understand competence somewhat as a subject, perhaps. We can discuss the ontology of that, but something on that. When we said social, it's not enough to know stuff. It's also about how can you create networks? How can you build alliances? How do you bring people on board to support whatever it is that you want to accomplish? Indeed, even as leaders in organizations where we have the formal power, we don't necessarily get the right things out of the people, because they may do as we say, but they may not be entirely vested into whatever we would like to accomplish. So the social skills becomes increasingly important. And we sometimes say that there are only around 6 jobs in Denmark where you don't need to have any sort of social skill. Those are the people that guards our lighthouses. Here, there is a career for you that cannot function with other people. But apart from that, no, you need to be able to function with other people. However, that is not enough either. Think of who would you rather employ? Someone that knows a lot of stuff, great, but don't get anything done? Or someone that knows perhaps a lot less, but get a lot of shit done? You probably go with the latter. So the action competence, if you think of, now you are also in an age group that maybe still actually use Facebook, you would say that there are tons of people that know millions of people, but they don't necessarily get so much done. And those type of people, so that's very interesting, but it's simply not enough, that one either. The ability to change kicks in. And that is, so we look at this as a mastery component. In order to master any given project or situation, you need a combination of this. What is quite interesting is, I'm not sure how it is in Estonia, but I would argue that to a large extent, where particular graduates out of universities, but to a large extent, I would go even with myself, that we are hired because of that, and we are fired for all of the others. No one has fired anyone for knowing too much. Yeah, he said, we're simply too smart, we have to fire that one. It's then like the Dilbert comic eventually. But you hire people, couldn't get anything done, couldn't work with other people, could not adapt. So the idea, of course, how do you bring that into an educational setting? Well, it isn't so easy as just to teach someone, this is important, please go home and read 3 papers on this and come back and write. Our theory of change here is that you need to expose people to this. You need to bring them into projects, into situations. This doesn't come without friction. They often experience that it didn't go so well. they worked with an organization and they said it was really, really difficult for them to understand what I was coming with. How could I bring them on board on my message? Why doesn't people just do as I say? All of those things. And the challenge for the school and for our staff is not to take the experience away. So you cannot reveal everything you know before the experience has happened. Can you follow me on that? The pedagogical challenge of, imagine that you try to explain to someone that, yeah, you're going to go out and work with this company. Please don't do this because then everything will fail for you. Or think about this, think about this, think about this. You sort of, in advance, you tell them exactly what they're supposed to do, and suddenly you gear their eyes and their ears and their experience to expect exactly that to happen. Any teacher knows that if you try to convince the students hard enough on something, the incentive model may pay wrongly out. You don't get the return that you were hoping for. Why? Because that we have intentional effects of it. So sometimes it's better to allow the students to fail. And then you have the conversation of what came out of this, rather than sort of advancing that one. That doesn't mean that you're going to sort of, yes, I think it's a great idea for you to try to bungee jump for the first time in your life because you are afraid of heights. Please go about to do that, and then they go into trauma. That's not what I mean. That's not it. You don't want them to do idiotic things, but there is a difference of trying to solve a problem that they think they have the solution on, and then learn from that maybe it wasn't that easy, as opposed to tell them this is never going to fly. And this is maybe where you learn in the best possible way, when you meet resistance. And the other thing is the peer-to-peer learning. I'm not sure how you do it here, but I think we were very early on the idea of peer-to-peer review, peer-to-peer learning.